So I'm here to introduce the speakers for today, and I'm excited about it because it's an interesting topic. So please enjoy what I have to say. First of all, we have three speakers, and I'm going to introduce a little bit about each one, and then I'll have them come up and come to the podium here to give their presentation. I'm going to start with Marcela Mejia Martinez, Chapman's Assistant Vice President of Admission. Marcela came to Chapman in 1998 from her alma mater, which was Loyola Marymount University, where she worked as an admission counselor and also a financial aid counselor. She held various roles in admission at Chapman prior to becoming the undergraduate admission and the head of the undergraduate admissions in 2007. She is widely regarded as a very ethical leader with a very deep passion for all aspects of admission work, and has served in several leadership roles with national, regional, and international enrollment organizations, which is quite a feat. She and her husband says that they went from empty nesters to having a full nest, and then back to an empty nest during the pandemic. They also have enjoyed living in the mountains of Medellin, Colombia, on their family farm for much of the quarantine, which must have been very interesting for them. She loves to travel. She loves to salsa dance. She's obsessed with her Libby Library app and podcasts. Now, I don't know what that is, but I'm really interested now. So if you want to ask her about her favorites, you can go do that afterwards. It sounds really interesting. She also has traveled quite a bit, not only as a student, but then becoming the admissions officer here. We're really proud of her. The second person on this speaker presentation is Dr. Lawrence L.B. Brown. Started at Chapman as a full professor and associate dean of student affairs for the School of Pharmacy, which was in 2013. He moved then to his current role of vice provost for the academic administration in 2019. He and his wife, May, live in Irvine, along with their daughter, Kalea, how to say it? Kalea, who just applied to Chapman. Yay! And what I love about this conversation is he says his godsend of a mother-in-law, whose name is Lolita. And of course, their 7-year-old rat terrier mix named Galen. And then, of course, their oldest daughter, Leilani, is actually a student at Chapman. She is in the BS Health Sciences program as a pre-physician assistant student. So, in addition to that, LB and May love golf. They are a huge Los Angeles Rams fan, have season tickets. And LB is actually a former trustee and a former president of the American Pharmacists Association, and is an international expert in the area of medication therapy management. Last but not least, Dean Mike Pelly has worked for Chapman for over 30 years here, and currently serves as the Vice President and Dean of Enrollment. He and his wife, Sarah, reside in Villa Park with their 8-year-old chocolate Labrador retriever named Orvis. Mike and Sarah both enjoy fly fishing, especially in their home states of Washington and Colorado. In his early years at Chapman, he founded the men's lacrosse team and was head coach for 5 years. Didn't know that I knew that. I remembered it, actually.
You added that.
I did add it, because I liked it. Now in his spare time, Mike enjoys restoring classic BMWs. Sarah enjoys driving them. For the past 10 years, Mike has served on the board of directors for the Community Foundation of Orange, and he would like to remind everyone here today to celebrate our veterans by attending the annual Field of Valor, which will be at Handy Park this coming Saturday. It's nice to learn about the lives of the academics, isn't it? Just to know who's behind all those kinds of things. At a university, we're always kind of curious about what are their real lives like. I think they're amazing humans, all three of them, just knowing a little bit about them. But turning to their program today, what are we doing? What are we wondering about the road in higher education? Where is it going? Will students be more or less positive about higher education? Is it worth the cost? Even though our students believe that this university handled the pandemic quite well, are they optimistic about the experience, especially having had quality of education partially online or sometimes all online? Will they expect that institutions will make education more affordable? Studies show that students are feeling less optimistic about the future. The pandemic has caused serious concerns regarding their mental health and their future. So what does a university do to provide resources to applicants about these issues? Add to this the steady lower birth rate that has been going on, which will impact the numbers of students entering higher education in the near future. How will that impact what a university must do to prepare for those terms of the cost, the resources, the support that the students are going to need? So I hope you're as interested as I am in hearing about this cliff. And I'm sure that these three expert panelists will have a lot to say. So please come up to the podium for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeannie. That was a nice introduction. And good research, by the way. I think you almost gave half of our presentation. So I really appreciate that as well. Also, thanks to Town and Gown for inviting us and for being here. This is a group that's always been near and dear to my heart. And I just appreciate all the support you provide because, especially when it comes to scholarships, Marcella and I, we are the ones who get to spend that money in many cases. And but I know you're also very involved in those scholarships as well. It just warms my heart because we understand the importance. We see students on a daily basis, and we have been for 30 years, at least for me, and not a day goes by where we get thanks. And it's for folks like you behind the scenes that actually make our job a lot easier. So thank you for that. I'm going to share two primary. I'm very data driven, so bear with me. I like numbers, and I'm going to share some data that talks about the pandemic and the impact it had on higher ed in general, and then also the upcoming cliff. Everyone knows about the pandemic, obviously, and I think the cliff is a lot more interesting. It's going to hit us in a few years. But in order to really understand what the future holds, I think there's some lessons to be learned on how the pandemic impacted higher ed. And while you consider these data points, also realize that Chapman has outperformed demographics in the past. Not all colleges are created equal. We are a very fortunate university. And as you see some of these slides with show a lot of obstacles in the future, know that we've had obstacles in the past and we have outperformed in most cases. If you, these slides are from the National Student Clearinghouse, and as you see in the bottom right corner, there's been almost a 5% drop in enrollment across the board. This is for undergraduate, graduates, just across the board, all schools in, they saw a 5% decline. Now, obviously, the pandemic required many universities to go remote, and I know that a lot of folks decided to take a year off, not just the students. That certainly accounted for most of the drop, but there's also the economic factors as well. As I mentioned, though, not all schools are created equal, and if you look at the 4.6% overall, the majority of the largest decline happened with the community colleges. And there's some pretty obvious reasons I could get into on that. Those students tend to be a little bit more transient, part-time, working, local. It's easier for them to take time off they're maybe not as invested, because they could be, like I said, part-time going for a 2-year degree, but they could be doing it over 3 or 4 years, as we often see. Students in the bachelor's program, and this is the majority of our students, saw a much lower decline, probably half of that 4.6. Whereas look at graduate enrollments. Graduates thrived. And this is also pretty obvious, to me anyway. When the economy takes a hit, graduate enrollments often will see an increase because people go back to work for retraining. But then you throw in the pandemic and you think about remote learning. The graduate students are a little older, have families. Remote learning is very enticing. When you're working all day and you gotta, go find parking and get to class versus possibly having a chance to go remote, it actually probably helped some graduate programs. But also think about the hands-on graduate programs like medical school or nursing. Those programs didn't go remote because they had exemptions to stay in person. So really, if you think about graduate, it's a kind of a trifecta where the pandemic really resulted in an increase in enrollment. So I want to take graduate off the table here and take a look at just undergraduate. Here you see a more significant decrease. This is a 6.5% decrease over a 2-year period. And you can again once see the majority of that decrease was at the 2-year colleges. The public 4-year and the private 4 years fared fairly well. The private 4 years of the nonprofit, like Chapman, actually we outperformed the publics. I'm not throwing a whole bunch of Chapman stats into this because this is more about higher ed, but I can also tell you in the very beginning how Chapman has outperformed national demographics. We did outperform most of these cases. A deeper dive into the 4-year colleges. This is a case of the haves and the have-nots, and this is really important. And this really worries me because some schools are not going to survive, in my opinion. If you look at the most selective institutions, schools that have long wait lists and high demand, those schools also generally have more resources. They could probably adapt if they needed to, or they're not so tuition driven. They have larger endowments. You can see that they had actually an increase, 1.4, 1.5, whereas the next level of schools have the decrease equal to the same amount. So in my opinion, the haves, the schools that are at the top of the food chain, are kind of competing for the same students, and it's a wash. One went up, one went down, but basically it's even. So where this leads. It's the schools at the lower end of the food chain that are actually probably more dependent on enrollment, and then they don't have wait lists, they're open admission, so they don't have just more students to draw from. These are the schools that had a lot of layoffs, and this is just from the pandemic. This is strike one. This is what we're living with right now. And so I think the worry I have with the cliff, which I'm about to get to next, is what does the cliff, is there going to be a 1-2 punch for some of these schools? And it worries me. And there's actually been some schools in California that are already closed. So again, not all schools are created equal. And what are the lessons learned here? Well, when you see these statistics and you see the impact the pandemic has had on higher ed in general, know that, Chapman's in a very strong position. We're not the strongest position by any means, but we're in a very strong position. And we're fortunate to have great leadership and great demand and our ability to pivot. And I think we pivoted very well during the pandemic. We also didn't have any layoffs. And I have friends who work at other institutions, especially the smaller liberal arts colleges that are in that lower, next tier down. Those schools, a lot of them had layoffs. And then becomes a resource-intensive situation where students can't get the services they need. It's a spiral. So that's happening right now, and that's from the pandemic. So, 1-2 punch. Here comes the cliff. So as Jeannie mentioned, in 2025, we're going to see a very steep decline in high school seniors, basically. It's 17 and 18-year-olds. And why is that? Well, to quote someone else, kids are expensive. Sorry. So go back to 2007 and 2008. By the way, your introduction was right on. You said so many things that resonate with this presentation. So thank you for that, because it does set the stage for what we are dealing with. But in 2007-8, when the economy collapsed, for lack of a better word, or declined, the birth rates went down. And you add 17 years to that, and guess what? You're in 2025. It's just around the corner. This is a 13% decline we're going to see in college enrollments. That really worries me. Now, we're currently around, the star, by the way, is where we are today. We're, 3.5 million students, more or less in higher ed. This goes back farther. This goes back to 1992. The 3.5 million has been pretty steady for the last 10 years or so, but if you go back, the gray area is the 3.5 million that has been pretty steady for 10 years. But if you go back to 92, you can see how much we've grown as a country in terms of population. This is an admissions person's dream. Lots of students in the pipeline, robust times, opportunity to grow. Those times are really over now. But what's most important on this is if you look at the demographics within those numbers, almost all the increase is from the underrepresented minority high school grads. The black line represents Hispanic, Black, and American Indian students. And the dotted line represents white and Asian students. You can see how the gap is narrowing, but I'll show you in a minute. The persistence rate, the retention rates, and also the college going rates, is the percentage of kids who actually go to college, is changing as well. So almost all that increase has been in light of diversity.
I will.
The other thing that's really important is to consider region. Not all regions are the same. This slide shows blue is a decline, orange is an increase in population. California, negative 11% in demographics. These are high school graduates, by the way. Texas, plus 11%. I gotta wonder if they're the same students. If you look at the overall United States, there's some real pockets. You see this orange growth in areas like North and South Dakota and Wyoming, large increases, but there's no one there to begin with. So when you have a large increase on a small sample size, we're not going to go to North Dakota to go recruiting. I mean, it's just not going to. Ironically, is North Dakota this?
Yes.
Now, we have students from 49 states except North Dakota, so maybe we should go to North Dakota.
We need a big scholarship for that.
It looks very promising. But let's dig into these states a little bit more. I'm breaking the same data, but I'm breaking it down by different ethnic groups. White, Hispanic, Black, African American, and then Asian Pacific Islander. What's interesting to me is, if you look at California, it's the only state that is blue in all 4 categories. So when states are declining across the board, it's one thing, but you're declining in all 4 categories, we're the only state. And look at Texas, since I mentioned it earlier. Texas has 3 orange growth areas and 1 blue area, and that's white. So Texas is definitely becoming more diverse. The orange swath for the Hispanic population is really interesting. I don't know what's going on with Illinois. Illinois is like this anomaly, and just like West Virginia is for the Asian population, but you can see how similar those 2 populations are. So in terms of the US growth. So consider this, if you're a New England, a small liberal arts college, and if I think I can go back, that's the backwards side. And you're surrounded by blue, which is declining enrollments. You're also surrounded by a lot of other colleges that look just like you. It's going to come down to resources. Are you one of the haves or the have-nots? Do you have resources and endowments? Because that would scare me. That's also, are you a national or a regional university? That's a huge factor. Chapman used to be a regional university. Almost, half of our students came from Orange County. Today it's about 18%. We've become much more national. So that's good for us because we're not so dependent on this blue, demographically blue state, but is showing 11% decline. Second to last slide. This is a slide that breaks the same population down into 3 socioeconomic levels. Top 20% of income earners, bottom 20% of income earners, and then the middle 60%. And what you're seeing here is the top line. This is the percentage of students from those demographics who go on to attend college the following year after high school graduation. Overall, about 70% of all high school graduates are enrolled in college the following year. It's about 80 some odd percent for the top 20%. And I can't read these graphs because this is so small on but you can read on the black arrow, the middle 60% actually had to decline by about 3 percentage points. I think it's 67 to 64. I honestly can't read it.
You got it.
Did I get it right? Okay, my memory is good. And then the bottom darker or bolder blue line is the graphic for the bottom 20% of income earners. This is where all the increase is. And this is impressive. This gets me excited. This is changing the world. This is changing family dynamics. This is probably one of the blessings we have in higher ed, because a small percentage increase on the college going rate has a huge impact against the demographic decline. You know, instead of having 70% of kids going to college, if it went up to 75%, it would wipe away the decline. So when you look at the cliff, you also have to consider, well, what percentage of kids are going to college and who is going to college? Well, to recap, there are going to be fewer students, they're going to be more diverse, and they're going to need more financial resources. So we know this, and we're prepared for this. And what are we going to do about it? Well, I'm going to let Marcella tell you. Thank you.
Well, in my 28 years of admission, there's never been 2 years that are identical. And there's always been this changing landscape of sorts. You saw that graph, the gray one, back in '92, and how there was always this growth and change. Prior to '92, when I first started in admission, there was also the same types of challenges and questions. The idea of a smaller pool of students to choose from. We also had the LA riots, and I was working at a university in LA. So whether it's a demographic shift, a social justice change of some sort, there's always something different that's really kind of put in front of us. So that idea of flexibility and elasticity is something that's really critical to admissions folks. The pandemic obviously has also exacerbated so much of that. So what I'm going to share with you is a little bit about what recruitment used to look like, what's happened and changed for us. When I started my career in admission, we didn't have cell phones, I didn't have GPS, we had paper applications, heaven forbid. It was a different world, and today we have to learn how to do content for TikTok and find the social media spaces where students are so we can find them. The adjusting and the different types of things that we have to do in order to find students has really, really changed things for the world of an admission counselor. So that's something I just want to lay out for sure. So outreach prior to the pandemic, folks in the fall would grab their bags and travel wherever we could. We traveled the world. We went to 23 different countries. We visited 28 of our biggest feeder states and found different ways to connect with students at high school visits, college fairs. We did hotel receptions and interviews, and we hosted lots of students on campus. Those college tours, we had students coming for big open house days and preview days. So there were lots of opportunities for that personal one-on-one connection and really sharing with prospective students and counselors the feel of Chapman. What does it feel like to be a Chapman student? They'd see it. They'd see our students passing through the plaza and high-fiving each other and giving each other hugs, and that warmth and that magic that happens here at Chapman was easily communicated to students in a variety of different ways. Then came the pandemic. And we had to shift hard as to how do we recreate those same moments and those same feelings in different ways for students. And so the huge shift to Zoom did a couple different things. Obviously, it made us think really quick and partner with our folks over at SMC as to how we were going to really bring Chapman life and on screen to students. We got to remove geographic barriers. We went to more countries. We were able to actually host events where I had folks from all different time zones at the same time in a Zoom session, whether that was a student panel or a virtual tour or presentations. So in a way, there was truly a blessing. And we went from visiting 28 states to 40 states. We increased the number of high school visits that we did. We incorporated many of the faculty, staff, and students from across campus to incorporate in our presentations, so departmental presentations with parents, with alums. And so we had some great opportunities that then when we came back, had to figure out, how do I do both of these things with the same size staff? Actually, not even the same size staff. The idea when we lose a staff member, do we need to replace them in the same way, or do I need someone that's going to be able to handle more virtual events? Or do I need someone that's going to be able to handle more in-person opportunities? And so really having to reimagine even what the office and how it's composed is something that's been really tricky for us. If you look at a huge missed opportunity is obviously bringing students to campus, right? So students want a lot more of a personalized opportunity. In 2019, we had a little over 45,000 visitors to campus through our events with tours and things. In 2020, none, right? We didn't host folks on campus. And so when we were hosting them virtually, it's not the same. And so there were lots of great opportunities for us as we now come into this new space, which is the current year, and I call this a benchmark year. This is the first year that we're coming back, and we all summer long, our high school is going to be open for us to visit. Should we or should we not do an in-person open house with thousands of people on campus? Will it be safe? Can we handle it? Can we do this? And so every day, we're still making decisions as to what we're going to do in the spring. Am I going to be able to host an admitted student preview day? Can we do hotel admitted student receptions? So every day is a new challenge and a new way of trying to figure out what to do next. The College of Performing Arts, who always held in-person auditions, moved to virtual auditions last year. And this year we're having to figure out, how do we do both? And again, it's just a very creative way of having to move through these spaces in very different ways. And then also taking really good notes and collecting data as to what works, what doesn't. Many students, they're pretty zoomed out, right? They're tired of being behind a camera as well. And it's really hard to talk into a computer screen to the, abyss and not knowing whether you're connecting with students or not. So even for my team, it's also really challenging. And so there's really some opportunities there to segment and make things in smaller bites, and we need a lot more video content and different things of that nature in order to really reach these students. And I think that that's something that's really a fun challenge, but definitely difficult for what we're trying to accomplish. One more here. I want to show you though that something that's really important, going back to the idea of the landscape and how it's changing. The volume of applications here at Chapman continues to grow. But I think that this is definitely something that many universities are seeing. Students, especially during the pandemic, kind of freaked out. They didn't know if they were going to be able to go somewhere or not, whether they wanted to stay close to home or they wanted to go far away, so they applied wide. More students are applying to more colleges. And so for us, we also have a couple different opportunities is to try to figure out, what does this demand disruption happen? How does it affect us? Will they choose us? So trying to figure out and forecast how many students should we admit? in order to bring in this targeted number. As an institution, I think our leaders also have another opportunity, is to think about, do we want to be a luxury brand university, like Pelly was showing, those top tier schools that jokingly, in our profession, they call them the highly rejected universities because they reject students more than they admit them with a 3% acceptance rate or a 5% acceptance rate? Or do we want to be a university that obviously shows students that they do belong here and that there is access to the university? And so do we want to be able to admit more students in order to give Chapman an option as to one of the places that they might choose along the way? So there's some big questions that we need to ask. The other thing that really happened for us is change in how we admit and how we select students. So the pool is obviously very different. With those geographic barriers turned down, the ability to have students coming from all over the world and all over the nation, the idea of context became really important in everything we were doing when we were reading our applications. Prior to the pandemic, we had already decided to go test optional. So that was something that was already new and different for what we were doing. We were looking ahead as to what are some of the trends in admission. And we realized that an SAT is just one data point. We've always been a holistic read when we're making our selections for admission. And so we really put emphasis on other things like leadership and communication and the ability to really bounce back from difficult situations. And we contextualize that and we operationalize that as a part of not only how we read, but also how we give scholarships to students and what it is that we are trying to attract to the university. So much of these changes are also looking back at that cliff and knowing that the demographic of students was changing. Students are coming from rural, urban, different types of resource schools, some with many resources, some with not so much. And so how do we partner with CBOs and with the high school counselors and with these families in order to not only just admit students to the university, but also make sure that we fund them in a way that we could really make Chapman a reality for many of them. When university students or high school students go online and they see this, that's terrifying. I was the first in my family to go to college. My parents immigrated here from Colombia. The idea of going to college, if I ever came to them and said, I want to go to a university that costs $80,000, they'd be like, we don't even make that, right? So how are we going to make this happen? So the idea of putting together different types of scholarships and opportunities for family became so important to us. So everything from those merit-based scholarships and the departmental scholarships, we have to really educate many of these families, many of whose parents were not educated here in the United States, or whose first language is not English. We're finding ways to reach them, to let them know there are ways to make Chapman a reality. And we've created all kinds of opportunities, even in our own backyard. We have the Chapman STEM Scholarship Program with the Orange High School science students. We have a CTAG program for promising teachers that come out of Rancho Santiago College, so for transfer students. There are a lot of new opportunities that we are building with an OC Heritage Scholarship. So these endowments and the different things that we are all contributing to in order to make Chapman a possibility is something that's really critical. We've put a lot of effort in our first gen students as well as our Pell Grant recipients as well. This helps diversify the campus in a different way. It's a socioeconomic diversity as well. That is something that's really critical to the ethos of who we are as an institution. On a side note, our Pell Grant recipients this past year retained at a 90.6%. It was pretty amazing. So they're coming and feeling supported and they're doing well. And the money's not the reason why they're leaving, right? So that's really one of the big key factors and things that I think is really important as we plan ahead. This is just a snapshot of what the campus enrollment looked like this past fall when I put together a presentation for the faculty. And I think it's just important for us to really recognize that we've become more global, we're more national, we're more international, we have way more first gen, We have a needier population. And so a shift for what it is that we are creating here at Chapman is that we really need to build a place where students feel they belong. And I think that's something that's really important. These are some of the key words of things that are important and that we see in our applicants when they come to us, and the types of, again, operationalized traits or values that are so important to us. But they want to be a part of a community. They want to be leaders, and they want to also have that support, not only supporting one another, but having support from faculty, staff, and alumni. And I think that's something that's really critical. When we read applications and we see students walking, or we read their applications and ask them, why Chapman? I think one of the key things that they always say is that when they come to campus and see our students, is they find that our students are genuinely happy. And I think that that's something that's really important, is that we continue to build a community here where we could make sure that all of our students feel the same sense of resources and support. And so that's something that's really critical. And I think that might segue into LB.
We've heard a lot of good information from Mike and from Marcella. You know, in case you missed it, here's the highlights, right? Mike says there's a cliff coming, right? But in that cliff, we're going to be seeing a decreased number of white high school students that we can bring into Chapman, but increasing number of Black, Hispanic, and American Indian students, right? So some good, some bad, right? Marcella talked about what we have in terms of scholarships and the outreach, that we're able to reach more of these students, right, to be able to mitigate that cliff somewhat so that we don't have drastically decreasing enrollments. But here's the problem. Before they even get to that point of even applying to Chapman, these are the things that they're seeing, right? Why aren't Black students thriving at Chapman University? And then another challenge of being Black at Chapman University, right? So all of this great work that we are doing, all of this great history and tradition and great environment that we have, that we know, can be great for Black and other minority students, we don't even get a chance to make that pitched often because of the news stories and other things that go on. And this area is, I guess, close to me because I've spent the last 18 years doing research in the area of consumer perception of pharmacists. So I'm always putting myself in the head of patients. How do they view pharmacists? Do they even know what pharmacists are doing when they're behind that computer, behind the counter? Like, are they looking at their stock or looking at ESPN, right? No, they're actually looking at your prescription profile, making sure that there's no drug interactions, no drug disease interactions, no allergies, and all this stuff to make sure the dose is not too high, right? But patients don't know that. You don't know that, right? You just see them behind a computer. It's the same way, right? How do we get inside the heads of these students that are out there and trying to address the negative views that they might be getting and trying to overcome? Because not only do we need to get them here to Chapman, when they get here, we need to make them feel loved, right? And appreciated and socially connected so that they'll stay. So again, I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of these issues, and you're right, the screen is small. So, when you talk to Black students, I've been involved in the Black Student Union, which is the Black student organization here, and, have talked to them about their view of Chapman before coming in and what are some of the issues. And here are some of them, right? And the leadership of the Black Student Union actually wrote up a list of concerns, I'll say, to President Stupa before the pandemic, saying like these things need to be addressed in order to improve the environment for Black students. So number one, low numbers of Black students enrolled at Chapman. Number two, low numbers of Black faculty here at Chapman. The lack of social support on campus, lack of Black fraternities and sororities on campus. And then the news reports, that they see, many of you remember the birth of a nation controversy at Dodge that fortunately got resolved. But even news reports of white students, racist outbursts during class, the white supremacist flyers and posters that were, posted up around campus. And even a professor using the N-word during class and trying to justify, using it. All of these things create an environment where not only the students have concerns, but their parents have concerns. I was at the Black student and parent orientation before the fall semester started, that was put on by Justin Riley. And Justin did a brilliant job. He brought out tons of stakeholders, right? From public safety to the admissions office, the advising office, right? Myself and some other vice provosts, right? But he had a lineup in front of the classroom, about 20, 25 people, all who were saying, we're here for you, we're here to help you succeed, we're here to support you while you're here. And afterwards, so many parents came up to me and said, I was really concerned about allowing my child to come here because of all the issues that I heard about. But seeing this support network that they have makes me feel a lot better. And that was so powerful to know that, yes, we have some issues, but there are ways to overcome. So what are some of the ways, and this is my last slide, amazing, I only have 3 slides. Because I knew I wouldn't get my full time. Yeah. Anyway, so what is Chapman doing about it? So first off, we have a $1.5 million faculty diversification initiative, which was started by President Strupa back in June of 2000, actually it was just last year, June of 2020. That was my fault. And it has fully funded 5 Black full-time faculty, most of which have tenure, and then provided financial support for 3 other faculty to kind of seal the deal, right? So the dean is like, we got this person, they're really interested in coming, but I just don't have enough to give them the salary that they can get somewhere else to encourage them to come. We gave them the additional money to get aboard. We've got this fantastic person, but I don't have enough money for the stipend for the director position. Can you guys help us out? We helped them out, right? Oh, I should mention, I'm presidential advisor for faculty diversification. So that's what I mean. The president and I have been working together on this initiative. And it's been extremely successful because we're increasing the number of Black faculty. Now we've already gotten all our full-time hires, fully funded lines, but we're going to be using the remaining money on like one-time money. So sign-on bonuses or money for moving assistants, just things to seal the deal to make it a little bit sweeter opportunity here at Chapman. And then also myself and Justin Riley created the Black Staff and Faculty Forum. He's a staff member, I'm a faculty member, as well as administrator. And this was created in January. We've got a leadership team that's there. And this is to support not only the Black faculty, give them community, give them some people that they can talk to. And quite honestly, when I started this, I didn't even know who the Black faculty were on campus. I'm not kidding you. Like I knew this person, that person, that person. But by the end of the kind of rolling conversation with like, who do you know that's Black in your college? It went from like 12 people that I knew of to, like 20 total that were out there, right? And now we have more. And then I mentioned Justin Riley. He was hired in the Dean of Students Office to be the Black student liaison. So he's very well connected with the Black student population. Quaylen Allen leads our First Gen program, which is not only minority, but a large portion minority. And then trustee Ronya Motri, she's leading an effort to get a Black fraternity or sorority here on campus, and she's getting really close, and that's going to be exciting. And then we also hired, I'm sure you heard, of our new vice president for diversity, equity, and inclusion, who's really going to be looking at these issues. Not the only one in charge of it. Everybody on campus is in charge of DEI issues, but he's definitely going to be there leading the charge. And then we brought in a faculty member, Mark Hobson, who's going to be Senior Director of Ethnic Studies Programs, which is not only there to increase the number of ethnic studies programs, but to embed diversity, equity, and inclusion issues within the curriculum for all students so they can get exposure to it. And then finally, campus safety has been stepping up their patrols to kind of prevent the poster white supremacist issue. So we have some challenges, right? And if we can get these messages out there about what we're doing to make Chapman a better place for those students, because again, convincing them to come here and then ignoring them and making them feel alone and excluded and not really connected doesn't give them the Chapman experience. And what do we want? Chapman experience for all. Am I right?
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, this question I think is probably directed more effectively at faculty. When I came here and joined the faculty in the mid-1990s, we were successful in recruiting a number of faculty, people of color, and lost them. They moved on. How are we doing with that now? Is there any sense of that? We lost a lot to USC, for example, way back in the day. And I think Marcella probably remembers this, and so does Mike.
Yeah, I think we're doing a lot better. It's something that we're paying a lot of close attention to. Having the Black Staff and Faculty Forum, I think, has been a tremendous benefit to keeping them here because, yeah, like I was a Black faculty at the University of Tennessee when I started out as assistant professor. And I know how it is to be alone, not with many people that are like you, that you can have conversations with, that wasn't included in going out to lunch with the rest of the faculty, or there was an event I wasn't included, right? And you feel kind of isolated, wondering, why am I here, right? You did all this work to get me here, said I was such a great person and valuable asset, and now that I get here, you give me a ton of committee work to do, right? Because you needed Black representation on the committee, so I'm on every single student committee, and still having to publish, do research, teach, and everything else, right? And they just get burned out. So we are, kind of looking at their committee loads, especially new faculty coming in, trying to keep them protected. But again, with the Black student and Black staff and faculty forum, we're creating that community and getting them more engaged with the students so that they'll want to stay around.
It's got to really be a challenge.
It is, but I think most of the colleges are trying to do a better job of being inclusive, right? Because that's the thing, we have diversity and inclusion. Diversity means, having different people, right? But inclusion means making people feel like they belong, right? And that they're wanted and that they're appreciated. And that's the tough thing to get over it. And here's one thing I wanted to mention, right? When you have this issue of diversity, oftentimes it's like, is it gonna, weaken the standards, right? Well, one thing, we're talking about Black students, Hispanic students, and American Indian students who are highly qualified to come. Like, we need to convince them to come here rather than Stanford, or here rather than, St. Mary's or whatever, right? So we're not talking about lowering the standards at all. But when you ask someone if they appreciate diversity, I already know the answer. Everyone in this room, everyone in the world appreciates diversity. How do I know that? Because you don't eat the same food every day. You don't wear the same clothes every day, right? You don't wear the same perfume every day, right? You don't have just one color in your house, right? You appreciate all the different animals we have, the different flowers, the different trees, the different music, right? Like, if you had to only have gray pants and a white shirt and black shoes and wear that every single day, and you only could eat, rice porridge in the morning and, bread in the evening, right? And you had no spices whatsoever. You realize how miserable a life that would be, right? And you can think of it from Soviet times, right? When you see the news reports of the limited amount of food and how depressing they looked, right? So we know we like diversity in our daily lives, right? It enriches us, it adds spice and flavor. But the question is, why is that great in these types of things? But when it comes to people, I don't know, they're different, they're not like me, and it'll be a challenge trying to talk to them, right? Now we don't like diversity, right? So all I say is, let's treat people like we do our food.
That was a great comparison when you were talking about comparing what we do in our daily lives to appreciating diversity. When I went to Chapman in the early 2000s, I witnessed some pretty awful acts towards minority students. And I still remember them to this day. And I was wondering what's being done besides teaching in the classroom. Is there an orientation with DEI, or how are you preventing those from happening?
Yes, so now in student orientation, there is a diversity, equity, inclusion presentation to kind of talk about these issues, and yeah, I'll be honest with you, you may have noticed, I'm Black, right? And I've dealt with these types of issues all the time, and as a Black person, especially older one, you try and let stuff rub off your back, but this newer generation, they're not having it. Like, they're not putting up with this stuff, they're like, okay, I'm out of here. Like, why is it my job to have to put up with this because they have an issue with me, right? And so that's why we need to really change the culture to make sure everyone's appreciated.
Yes, and I come from a family of whites, blacks, and Hispanics, pretty much mixed. In fact, my cousin's wife was the first Mexican hired by LAPD in 1946. You know what that was like for her. But my great nephew has a place called Winter Circle out in Corona, and he's part white, part black, and he's got. It's a very unique. You talk about change in the world, and he is changing the world. His school is for kids pretty much between 6th and 10th grade, I would say. A lot of boys and girls go to that. It's quite a facility. I've been out there. Maybe you should take a look at that sometime. And his name is Jordan Campbell. He was All-American at Norco High School. He played for USC. Started there. Yeah. Well, my brother went to USC Law School too. But the thing is, when I went to this small college in the Midwest, which was similar to Chapman years ago, we did have blacks, and we had also, but they were from West Africa, he spoke French. And the kids too were from Hawaii. And so we had a real mix there at that time. And I don't know about just forming a fraternity just for blacks and so forth. The blacks were my fraternity, the guys in Hawaii were from my fraternity. I think we're getting over this. I hope we're getting over this. And I would like to see these changes as you put it also. We have a Christmas party every year. A lot of people from here come to it. We have people from all walks of life, believe me, all different religions and ethnicity. And you know what? Everyone gets along. So I'd like to see that happen here at Chapman too, sir.
Bravo.
Follow up on fraternity sorority. You talk about bringing in a fraternity and sorority for black. How well diversified are the existing fraternities and sororities?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get down that deep road. Believe me, it's been tried, right? And I think eventually we'll get there. But from what I hear from the black students on campus, there are some blacks that are part of the fraternities and sororities, but by and large, there's enough students that are looking for a different experience where they feel fully welcomed and appreciated as part of the group. So it's my hope that we can eventually get to the point where, you know, there's no need for that, but the challenge is right now we need it and the students want it, and it would be beneficial to improving the culture for them. I don't have a microphone. She's controlling. Yeah.
How did you manage to recruit international students during the pandemic?
It's been interesting, especially, and we're still not traveling internationally currently. So we do a lot of what's called group travel, where we've partnered with other universities and we come in and do presentations. The time zone differences are amazing. I get up sometimes and do presentations at 4:30 in the morning for India. I have Bryant Dowd on my team, who's one of our associate directors and leads our international charge. He is working some crazy hours, and it, you know, when we travel and you're there, it's very different. You adjust to the time zone. You are not here, so you don't get pulled onto campus to do things on campus because you are clearly across the world. But now when we are still here in California and also have the duty of being abroad, it has been difficult. This past 2 cycles has been also very challenging in not knowing, you know, which countries can come in or not. The idea of, you know, how welcome students feel from an international lens has also been quite the challenge. There's a lot of uncertainty, even coming into orientation this past year, as to whether we would accept the vaccines from another country, right? From the WHO. And so just having to make these decisions and also partner with folks across campus that have been super supportive, but how do we also welcome our students to campus in ways and support them has really been a big question. So yes, it's been an interesting challenge. I can't wait to get back on the road.
Vicki, a follow-up to that also is there were many students who were admitted who were denied any sort of immigration or
That's right.
I-20 paperwork. They just couldn't get appointments. So we actually, the admission part of it was not the only complication.
No.
I have a question
Joy?
via someone on Zoom. Has the admissions office seen an increased interest in DEI from prospective students and their parents? And a follow-up, how important has DEI become in the decision-making process for applicants?
Since I've been at Chapman, this has been my number one charge. My idea of bringing in an extremely extraordinary, talented group of students from a broad diversity, whether it's geographic, socioeconomic, religious, it just makes this place a better university. And I've always led with that. So it's always been front of mind. The team that we have in admissions has always been a very diverse team. The number one thing I always ask whenever we have a hire opportunity is what voice is missing at the table? Because it's really important when we have committee and we are making selection that we bring that diverse lived experience to the decision making, which is really important. And so it's always been a huge commitment on our end. So there really hasn't had to be too many shifts. I think that the areas where we've been able to accomplish more is really having more scholarship opportunities, more opportunities to help fund students and make Chapman an attractive place. So it's attracting students to actually choose Chapman. I always tell students that they have way more power than we do in the admission office. We have this amazing group of students that apply. We put out offers on the table, and then they have lots of choices. And really, my job from January to May 1 is a pretty stressful one because I don't know what this 17-year-old is going to end up doing, right? So I think that that's something that's real, and they have a lot of offers on the table. As we become a more global and diverse university, not just here at Chapman, but we're also competing, like LB said, with these higher tiered institutions for the same students. And so it's the idea of how do we make sure that we are in spaces that the students are, whether that's physically going to the community-based organizations or different high schools that aren't the same places where other universities are also recruiting the same exact students. So it's trying to find a talent pool in different pockets, in different places, which is also really important.
I got a wink and a nod over here, which is really a hook. So we have one last question.
Thank you for the presentation. Following up on what you were just saying, as we approach the cliff and we have the opportunity to court an entirely new type of student, how is admission forecasting how to adjust to that in terms of recruitment and communication to this different body of students?
Well, let me preface this because Marcella is, her commitment to this and the team's commitment to this, I think it's better said from someone who's not Marcella, because I really believe in what she believes in. I think the admissions office has always held this torch high prior to even DEI being something we all understood. This goes back a long, long time. I've been at Chapman over 30 years. So clearly, as she mentioned, getting in the right space to recruit the right students, that's critical. Telling our story is critical. Getting students here to see who we are is critical. But having the experience of when they're here, you lose one student for something that happens, something bad that happens. The ramifications of that one bad experience takes years to unravel. And so that's why it's so important to build a climate and a community that we're all rowing in the same direction. But to really tout what Marcella and her team are doing. I used to be the director of admissions. Now, when I was promoted to vice president, my first call was actually Marcella. You're moving into my old slot. And she'd been here, I don't know, 20 some odd years already at this point. So the staff had very little turnover, but they've always been committed to this. And now that we're getting all the oars in the water, rowing together and having an infrastructure here on campus. It's making our job, frankly, a lot easier. So I'm excited about it. And then we have things like the cliff and all the demographics we showed you. So, it's not just, that we need to do this. This is a business model as well. I hate to say it, but this is the future of who we are. We're not doing it because of that. We're doing it because it's the right thing to do. But I feel like we've always done it. We just didn't get the credit for it. Marcella, go ahead if you want. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to add, in terms of one additional venue that you might think about that hasn't traditionally been done. Because one thing I know about the Black community, the guys get their hair cut pretty much regularly, right? Sometimes once a week, and the ladies go to the beautician to get their hair done. And one thing we saw in healthcare was we started educating barbers and beauticians on the dangers of too much salt intake and hypertension, right? And over a couple of years, we actually saw a decrease in the hypertension prevalence in the Black community due to those outreaches. So I could envision, getting some barbers and beauticians and talking to them about Chapman. Because what do they do when the people are sitting in the chair? They chat about stuff, right? And people trust, don't know why, but they trust their barbers and their beauticians, right? Kind of like bartenders, right? But that would be a great place to go into that no one else is really.
It truly is about being in a lot of different spaces, and everything we do in admission is about relationship building. And we really take that seriously. It's relationship building with college admission counselors or high school counselors, and with folks that are in community-based organizations, or even with churches or whatever that might be. It's community building and really trying to be creative. Number of years ago, I can't even remember how many now, because we were upstairs instead of the second floor of Arduous. We started doing service projects as a part of our outreach. And we go into communities and we put together a service project and invite applicants to join us. And so it's a different way for them to get to know who we are as an institution, things that are important to us. But then also we get to see them in a really relaxed setting as opposed to a formal interview process where they can maybe be too awkward or whatnot. And so to expand that type of unique way of recruitment is something that if I had the resources to do it, that'd be way more important to me, because it'd be impacting the community as well as building community. So to do things that are unique and different, it'll be really interesting to see what we do in the coming year. Again, I call this my benchmark year, to try to figure out that balance between the hybrid. We're never going back. This pandemic allowed us to do things that we always wanted to do. We always wanted to have a virtual tour. We got to do it. We always wanted to have a self-guided tour. So if folks come to campus on a Saturday and we're not here, they have an app that they could download and they could actually walk around campus and get to know us in a guided way. So we've been able to quickly move and pivot to things that were always on my list of things to do, but we never were able to do it. So I can't imagine what we're going to be able to do over the next 5 years to really reach families and students. Things as simple as, I was just doing a presentation in Puerto Rico 2 days ago, and we did an entire financial aid session for the island of Puerto Rico in Spanish. Like, those are the types of things that we're doing, and we've always done, but couldn't reach Puerto Rico ever. I've never even been there. Now I'm promising them that I'm going to go there in March. I've got a concert I need to go to in March. So.
I'm getting the hook twice now, and I want to conclude on this one comment. Recruitment is everyone's job. I've always said that. We have a great story to tell here at Chapman. It's important for us to get the story out. I think the folks in this room and hopefully those who are on Zoom know the story, but let's not take that for granted. It's so nice to be back in person, because the campus thrives when the students are here, and this place sells itself. Just walking around, you can see what a great place this is. You can also see the diversity nowadays, much better than it used to be. So on that note, recruitment is everyone's job. Keep pushing the envelope, keep pushing the message, and thanks for all you do to support us.